I mean, a lot of investors meeting and discussing prospects with regard to the emerging market space, and it seems that Africa is receiving a lot of attention. Tell us about some of the exciting prospects lying ahead, and I think everyone's taking notice of the fact that in most parts of Africa we're seeing double-digit growth.
Thank you. You are right that at this particular conference on emerging markets, which is on private equity in particular, Africa is getting a lot of attention. And I believe that the reason Africa is getting this attention is that, like you rightly pointed out, we are seeing significant growth in the midst of all the difficulties we have in the other parts of the world. And I think investors are increasingly recognizing that in a global era, that Africa is worth looking at. In terms of specific areas of opportunity, I think it will vary from region to region. In West Africa and Nigeria in particular, we are seeing that there is increased interest in consumer goods and fast-moving consumer goods and areas that are tied to the population growth. We are seeing that opportunities in the deregulating sectors of the economy. There's a lot of interest in seeing what will happen in the power sector, for instance. We also see that in some of the other sectors like financial services, where there have been a lot of reforms and restructuring, there's increased interest. So I think overall, this is a good time for Africa.
Absolutely. Let's just touch on some of the sectors that you pointed out. So FMCG and obviously power, banking sector being very key. A big move, it seems, away from the resource space. So when we say that investors are interested within these sectors, are we looking at private equity interest? What kind of interest are we actually seeing? In what kind of form of investment are you expecting going forward?
First, let me say that there is obviously a general interest in the continent. But in terms of the specific expressions of that interest, we think that private equity is of interest because if you look at Africa and how much of the economy is listed on the stock exchange, then you will find that there's a lot of it that you have to access through the private space. And that's where private equity comes in. So you find that for a lot of the growth sectors in the economy, be it power like we talked about, or even some of the other sectors as well, that private equity becomes a meaningful way to get to participate in the growth that is happening and in the opportunities that are in these sectors. And that's where private equity is of interest. Having said that, I do think that the public markets are also seeing renewed interest, but I think private equity will play an increasingly important role over the next several years.
Absolutely. So, okay, I mean, are you saying this is going to be the largest form of investment going forward? What about equity markets? We're starting to see increased liquidity. We know that a lot of foreign investors are interested, particularly in the Nigerian market. Kenya also receiving quite a bit of attention as well. Are you seeing sort of, a trend in both of these areas where you see private equity coming to the fore and then perhaps some of those companies being sold and then listing going forward? I mean, obviously this is quite a tight link, and perhaps I'm talking slightly in the long term, but that could be an interesting trend to watch.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And it's not either or. I do believe that investors, as you know, when it comes to asset allocation, they don't say, I'll do private equity. Private equity is still, at most, for most investors, maybe 10-15% of their overall asset allocation. So you will continue to see activity in the public space, I mean, in terms of listed equities. But I think you will see increasing activity in the private equity space, primarily because the opportunities that are available, if you're going to tap them to the fullest extent, then you do need to work in the private space because most of them are not listed on the stock exchange.
Okay, so a lot of exciting things happening. I mean, 54 countries.
But there is a tight link.
Yeah, 54 countries on the continent, 1 billion people. We're talking about emerging markets. Would you say that Africa is taking preference relative to other emerging markets, Okey?
I would say Africa is playing catch-up, but that catch-up is important. I mean, some of the statistics we've seen is that most of the other emerging markets have received a lot of attention in terms of funding and capital allocation. Africa is just picking up. So the way we kind of look at it is not so much that we are displacing as much as we are taking what is rightfully meaningful for the Africa space. So you will find that there is increasing the allocation that people would typically like to put to work in Africa once they believe that the opportunities are there. We still have a long way to go to get there. So I think the next 5 years or more, you will see just increasing capital coming into Africa.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you so very much for joining us. Great to have you on the program. And that was Okey Enelamah joining us live from Washington.